All right, so your first topic for Unit 1 is Introduction to Culture and your objective. So the thing at the top of your notes is going to be define the characteristics, attitudes, and traits that influence geographers when they study culture. So that needs to go at the top of your notes. So the first thing that we're going to do is define culture. What is it and how can we categorize it? So, culture, do we need to turn off this other light? Can y'all read this? We good?
Yeah.
Okay. So, culture is a group's learned behaviors, actions, beliefs, and objects. Culture can be seen and it can be unseen. So the visible parts of culture are a group's actions, possessions, and how they influence the landscape. But the invisible parts are kind of what guides them to do what they do. So their belief systems, their customs, and their traditions, the things that you cannot see about a culture. Usually the invisible parts of a culture, the unseen things, affect the visible parts. So they affect what people wear, they affect what people have, and how we change the landscape. And when studying culture, geographers divide them into three different cultures. So every type of culture, American culture, Amish culture, any type of culture can fit into one of these categories. So the first one is indigenous culture. Indigenous culture, people that are native to an area. So that's the Native Americans of the United States, the Aboriginals in Australia, and a bunch of native tribes throughout the world. So it's the culture that originated in that place, and the people who were originally there still practice it. That's indigenous culture. The second culture is called local culture. This doesn't mean it's whatever culture you practice within your city. That's not what that means. But local culture can be found in homogenous groups of people with a strong connection in beliefs and customs. They're usually isolated groups. That doesn't mean that they build a wall around themselves. It just means that, like, you're either a part of this group or you're not. There's not a whole lot of intermingling. And it's distinct. When you see these people, you know that they're different, that they're not like the other people around them. The most popular example of this is probably the Amish. You look at their culture, you look at them, you can tell that they're different. They don't fit in with the rest of American culture. I spent fall break in Waco, Texas, and I stayed on this property that was owned by this group called the Homestead Heritage. Have any of you ever been to Waco and have ever stayed there or been there? Because you can visit it. You have? Not the Homestead Heritage? Well, the Homestead Heritage people, they're kind of like the Amish, but they use technology, if that makes sense. They're a self-sustaining community. So there's this group of people that live on this 100-acre plot of land. They make their own cheese. They grow their own vegetables. They make their own pottery. They have their own supermarket. They make their own soap. They grind their own wheat. They make their own pancake batter. Like, they thrive on the fact that they don't need everybody else. That if the rest of the world shut down, they still had what they needed. They're a religious group, but that is an example of a very close to home local culture. So, like, you can go eat at their restaurant and stuff. Their food is so good because all of their ingredients are fresh. They're not processed. But that is an example of local culture. And I actually have a picture of where we stayed at. And then you have popular culture, or what's oftentimes referred to as pop culture. So pop culture is represented by large, diverse, heterogeneous groups. So what this means is a bunch of different types of people participate in this certain trait or this type of culture. It's heavily influenced by social media, TV, and movies. It's widespread in the world, but it changes constantly with contact and interaction. So the more that technology increases, the more time-space compression, the more globalization, it's going to change more quickly because trends are going to be able to be seen faster and different things like that. It's non-distinct in the cultural landscape, meaning it's hard to tell one place from another because every place begins to look the same because everybody is participating in the same types of things, which leads to an idea of placelessness, that everything begins looking the same. That Monroe starts looking the same as Mobile, Alabama, and Mobile, Alabama starts looking the same as Athens, Georgia. Like everything, again, the landscape begins looking the same. I'm going to give you a few more minutes to write this down. Here are some examples of indigenous cultures. There is a group in Peru. There's a group in South Africa. You have Native Americans in the United States. Obviously, there are more, but here are some examples. You can pick these out pretty easily. Then you have local culture, which is what I was talking about. To the left is the Amish. To the right is Chinatown. Could be another part of local culture. And at the bottom is the homestead heritage that I was talking about. That building, the tan building, it is there, or this one actually down here. The bottom left is the grist mill, which is where they like grind wheat and stuff to make pancake batter or cornbread batter, anything like that. Which, by the way, their pancakes were the best pancakes I've ever eaten. It was so good. I bought some pancake mix. I'm probably going to make it tonight. But anyways, that building, do you guys know the painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware? So obviously you know who George Washington is, but there's a guy in the front of the boat in that painting, and that was his building. The bottom left one was his building. And so they actually paid to move it on their property and turned it into a grist mill. They've been there since like the 70s. But that is an example of local culture. And then you have pop culture. And the reason I put all McDonald's on here is to show you that with pop culture, you look at these pictures and they could literally be anywhere in the world. Every single one of these pictures is from a different country. But you could take that. I could tell you that this was all in America and you would believe me, wouldn't you? Because it all starts looking the same. Everybody eats McDonald's all around the world. It's a trait of pop culture. The reason that there's a blank space is because I was going to get like a picture of one of the Rustin McDonald's and put it there, and then I just kept forgetting, or it like was blurry when I was driving past or something. But I didn't get it. But I wanted you to see the fact that it's hard to tell these places apart because of pop culture. Like I said earlier, which leads to a sense of placelessness in that nothing really seems distinct because it all looks the same. So you have 3 pictures here in completely different parts of the United States. The one on the left is in New York, Niagara Falls, New York. The top right is San Antonio, Texas. And then the bottom is a shopping center in Hawaii. Very different parts of the United States, but I could tell you, again, that is from Shreveport, Louisiana, and you would believe me. It starts with pop culture, and the more access you have to it, everything starts looking the same because they like the same things. We like the same foods. We like to do the same stuff because it becomes part of pop culture. And so as a result, these places start changing the landscape to reflect that. Culture traits. So the geographers study, obviously, the different types of culture, indigenous, local, and pop culture. But to do that, they have to look at culture traits. So culture traits are the seen and the unseen individual elements of a culture. And when you put them all together, they make up the culture. So when you put together the food, clothing, art, architecture, sports, dance, language, religion, family structure, beliefs, practices, and values of a place all together, you get like a complete picture of what their culture is like. Again, some of these things are seen and some are unseen. The material aspects are seen, the non-material aspects are unseen. But like I said earlier, a lot of the times the unseen can be reflected and seen in the material aspects. There are a lot of religions that determine the type of clothing you can wear, or a lot of people's beliefs about modesty affect the type of clothing that is available or that you wear. And that can be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, religion is a seen part of culture. You just see the effects of it. Religion itself cannot be seen. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is what happens when cultures come in contact with one another. So when culture spreads, it's called diffusion, and we'll talk about how that happens and why that happens in another topic. But when cultures do spread, it's not like they stop when another culture begins. They come in contact, they interact, they blend, and there are several results of that. And so we're going to look at those, and this will be like the last set of notes that we talk about. The first thing that can happen is called ethnocentrism. It's judging other cultures based on the rules of your own culture. This is what we experienced reading the body ritual of the Nasarima on Friday, when we started kind of judging that culture based on how we thought what they were saying was weird and stuff like that. So it's the belief that one's own culture is superior to others. And we do this naturally, not because humans are evil and we think everybody sucks, everyone that's not like us sucks. It's just natural. Like, your culture dictates what you think is right and wrong, and you in your heart of hearts believe that. And so whenever you see something that you think is right or wrong, you take notice and you start judging that. Not because you want to be mean, but just because that's what we do. The opposite of ethnocentrism is cultural relativism. And it just states that the culture should be judged based on its own standards, not based on another culture. So we need to understand why certain people do things a certain way in order to fully understand it. So ethnocentrism and cultural relativism are opposites. When two cultures come in contact, you can also have acculturation, which is when an ethnic group or immigrant group adopts the values and practices of the larger group. A simple example of this is, let's say, an Indian family, like from the India and Asia, moves to the United States, and they all have Indian names. Now their family grows up and they start acting more American. Their kids have gone to American school, they went to American college, they do American things. Well, when those kids have kids, they're probably going to name their kids English names, not Indian names, because they are a part of that bigger culture now. So that is an immigrant group or ethnic group adopting the values and practices of the larger group. So you just kind of fit in more. They don't completely abandon their culture, but they identify with the larger group. So they're going to name their children names that are synonymous with that culture. Very close to acculturation is assimilation, and it's when an ethnic group can no longer be distinguished from the larger group because they have adopted like every single part of that culture. Complete assimilation is very, very rare, but different parts of the culture can be assimilated, and it can get pretty close to the whole thing, but complete assimilation is rare. And when assimilation occurs, it's like you can't, everyone looks like the same culture, or they're all doing the same things or eating the same things, different things like that. Those two are very close, but assimilation is, I guess, on a bigger scale. All right, so the next two things that can happen as a result of cultures coming in contact are nativism and syncretism. So, nativism or a nativist attitude just means anti-immigrant. So, this can be directed to a specific group, or it can be a general dislike of anyone from other places. So, if it's directed towards a specific group, it's like we want, or we don't want people from this country coming in, but everybody else can. Or we don't want these types of people coming in, but everybody else can. We don't have a problem with that. But then there are certain places which the United States can be said to have nativist attitudes towards certain groups. Like, let's be honest here. They do. But there are places like Japan who have like nativist attitudes, like a general dislike of anyone from other places. Like, we don't want immigrants coming in. Not because we necessarily hate you. We just don't want your culture with ours. And that would just be the difference between a specific group or a general dislike of anyone ever coming in. And then the last thing that can happen is called syncretism. So it's the blending of traits from two different cultures to form a new trait. So in Haiti, their like largely practiced religion mixes Catholicism with African voodoo, which created like a whole new religion. And then another example is Tex-Mex. So it's taking American cuisine and Mexican cuisine and putting them together to make a whole different type of food. That is syncretism. It's the blending of two different cultures to form a completely new trait. After you get that last note down, that's the end of the notes for topic 1. So you need to do your summary. I've had a lot of people come up to me in the first 9 weeks like, I don't really know how to study. I feel like I know the material and then I come to the test and I don't know it. I've told you from day 1, if you can't summarize what we talked about, you don't understand it. So don't ever skip that part of taking your notes. Okay, I don't do it because I think you should waste 3 minutes writing it. I do it because it's a check for if you understand what we just talked about. And if you can't summarize it, you don't understand it. So you either need to ask someone next to you, or you need to ask me, or watch the lecture video or something like that. So go ahead and do that summary at the bottom, answering the objective.